Hello, everyone. We are from Group 8, and today we are going to talk more about negotiations, specifically Chapter 3 and 4 of our textbook. So, our first point is to focus on interests and not positions. There's a crucial difference between interests and positions. At first, it might be assumed that the basic problem of negotiation is the different positions. However, it is a conflict of interest between each side's needs, desires, concerns, and fears that motivates people and acts as the real reason behind positions. So, in the book, there's a case study of how the Egyptian Israeli peace treaty at Camp David in 1978 came to be. So Israel and Egypt both insisted of keeping positions of Sinai. But if you look behind their positions, there are completely different reasons on why they want to have the area. So what Israel really want is peace and what Egypt really want is sovereignty. So they reconcile their interests and find a position that fulfills both of their interests, in which Egypt got to keep Sinai as a demilitarized zone. So reconciling interest works because of two reasons. The first being that for every interest, there are several positions that can be taken to satisfy it. There are alternative positions that can meet both of the interests of negotiating parties. And the second reason being that there are more interests than just positions. So they're compatible in different interests. For example, usually it is assumed that opposing positions meant opposing interests. If you are on defense, then the other party is on attack. However, if you look at the underlying interests, it will reveal that there are more shared interests than opposed interests, like a landlord wanting to maximize his return and a tenant who wants to minimize rent. If you see, you can if you see thoroughly, you can find interest behind their positions that can benefit both parties if you taken it to consideration for the long run. Additionally, agreements can also be made from different interests, for example, between a shoe seller and its consumer. So the transaction involves two things: money and shoes, in which both of the parties value. However, one party might value the other thing more than the other, like the shoe seller would be more interested in money and you would be more interested in the shoes, hence the transaction. They are different, but they are complementary. So differing but complementary interests can both serve as the building blocks for a wise agreement. Now that you know the benefits of going behind positions to look for interests, how do you find those interests? How can you identify interests when they are unexpressed and intangible? So first you should ask why. You should put yourself in their shoes and examine what are the positions that they might take. The answer that you come up is probably their interest. And then you should ask why not. Think about their choice and then identify the basic decisions that those on the other side probably see you asking them. And ask why they have not made their decision. What are their interests that might stand on their way? So in this slide, you can see an example on how you can look for interest. You should ask whose decision you want to affect, what decisions people on the other side see you asking them to make, and then you should analyze the consequences on how it impacts your interests and also how it impacts your group's interests. So that is it for my part. The next part will be explained by my colleague Devin.
So now I'm going to explain about the aspects that need to be taken into account while negotiating. The first one is realizing that each side has multiple interests. In almost every negotiation, each side will have many interests, not just one. For example, if I'm negotiating with other party, my interest and his or her interest will be different. So I have to respect his or her interest and they need to respect mine. The second one is to realize that the most powerful interests are basic human needs. In searching for the basic interest behind a declared position, look particularly for those bedrock concerns which will motivate all people. And if you can take of such basic need, you increase the chance of both being reach an agreement and the other sides of keeping to it. Basic human needs include security, economic well-being, a sense of belonging, recognition, and control over one's life. The third one is to make a list to sort out the various interests of each side. It helps to write them down as they occur to you. This will not only help you to remember them, it will also enable you to improve the quality of your assessment as you learn new information and to place interest in their estimated order of importance. The fourth one is to talk about your interest. The purpose of negotiating is to serve your interest. The chance of that happening explain your interest to the other party. So you have to be confident in explaining your interest to the other party in the negotiation. Moving on to the fifth aspect, it is making your interest come alive. So the goal here is to be specific. Concrete details not only make your description credible, they also add impact. As long as you do not seem to imply that the other side's interests are unimportant or illegitimate, you can afford to take a strong stance in setting forth of the seriousness of your concern. The sixth one is acknowledging their interest as a part of the problem. So, if you want the other side to appreciate your interest, you can begin by demonstrating that you appreciate theirs. So people will listen better if they feel like they have understood you and you have understood them. They tend to think that those who understand them are intelligent and sympathetic people whose own opinions may be worth listening to. The seventh one is put the problem before your answers. If you want someone to listen and understand your reasoning, give your interest and reasoning first, and then you can give your conclusions or proposals later. The eighth aspect is to look forward, not backward. So instead of talking about what have been done the past week, you can express your interest by asking what could be done the next week so that people will be more open to your suggestions. The ninth aspect of negotiation will be concrete but flexible. In negotiation, you want to know where you're going and yet be open to fresh ideas because an open mind is not an empty one. So you need to be open to fresh new ideas. The last but not least is be hard on the problem, not the people. Negotiating hard for your interest does not mean being close to other side's point of view. Quite the contrary, you can hardly expect other side to listen to your interest and discuss the options that you suggest if you don't take their interest into account and show yourself to be open to their suggestions. Successful negotiations require both being firm and open.
Alright then, I'll be explaining how to invent option for mutual gains for all parties in a negotiation. Often you are negotiating along a single dimension, such as the amount of territory, the price of a car, the length of a lease on an apartment, or the size of a commission on a sale. At other times, you face what appears to be an either-or choice that is either markedly favorable to you or to the other side. You may see the choice as one between winning and losing. Also often, negotiators leave money on the table. This means that they fail to reach agreement when they might have, or the agreement they do reach could have been better for each side. Too many negotiation end up with a half an orange for each side instead of the whole fruit for one and the whole peel for the other. To avoid this, we need to first diagnose the situation to understand the whole image involving all parties' needs and goals. In a contract negotiation, they are equally likely to believe that their offer is reasonable and should be adopted, perhaps with some adjustment in the price. All available answer appears to lie along in a straight line between their position and yours. Often, the only creative thinking shown is to suggest splitting the difference. In most negotiations, there are four major obstacles that inhibit in the advancing of an abundance of options. The first problem is premature judgment. Nothing is so harmful to inventing as a critical sense, waiting to pounce on the drawbacks of any new idea. Judgment hinders imagination. You may also hear that by inventing option, you will disclose some pieces of information that will jeopardize your bargaining position. If you should suggest, for example, that the company help finance the house you are about to buy, your boss may conclude that you intend to stay and that you will in the end accept any rise in salary he is prepared to offer. The next one would be searching for a single answer. If the first impediment to creative thinking is premature criticism, the second is premature closure. By looking from the outside of a single best answer, you are likely to seek a wiser decision-making process in which you select from a larger number of possible answers. The last thing we need to do is a bunch of different ideas. Since the end of product of negotiation is a single decision, they fear that the free-floating discussion will only delay and confuse the process. So stop thinking this way. We as negotiators must explore all the possible answers. The third problem is the fixed pie assumption. A third explanation for why there may be so few good options on the table is that each side sees the situation as essentially either I get what is in dispute or you do. If a negotiation appears to be already having a fixed result that only benefits one party, then it will be a big problem for the other party, resulting in them not wanting to negotiate. The last problem is thinking that solving the problem is their problem. It is the final obstacle to inventing realistic option lies in each side concern which only its own immediate interest. For a negotiator to reach an agreement that meets his own self-interest, he needs to develop a solution which also appeals to the self-interest of the other. Short-sighted self-concerns thus leads a negotiator to develop only partisan position, partisan argument, and one-sided solution, which are very bad. After the diagnosis process, then the next step we should do is the prescription process. When you find creative option, then you will need to do first separate inventing from deciding. Since judgment hinder imagination, separate the creative act from the critical one. Separate the process of thinking a possible decision from the process of selecting among them. Invent first, decide later. As a negotiator, you will of necessity do much inventing by yourself. It is not easy. By definition, inventing new ideas requires you to think about things that are not already in your mind. You should therefore consider the desirability of arranging an inventing or brainstorming session with a few colleagues or friends. Such a session can effectively separate inventing from deciding. Steps of brainstorming. So how do you design a brainstorming session that are highly effective and efficient? The first process before brainstorming, the step in this process are defining the purpose, choosing the participant, designing the environment to be more comfortable, designing an informal atmosphere, and choosing a facilitator. The second process, daring brainstorming. The step in this process are setting the participants, clarifying the rules, the brainstorming session itself, the recording the ideas to be decided later. The last process is the after brainstorming. The step in this process are selecting and starting the most promising ideas, inventing improvement for the promising ideas, and setting up the time to evaluate ideas and finally decide. So another important aspect to prescription process is to consider brainstorming with the other side. Although more difficult than brainstorming with your own idea, brainstorming with people from the other side can also prove extremely valuable. It is more difficult because of the increased risk that you may disclose confidential information or lead the other side to mistake an option you devise for another. To protect yourself when brainstorming with the other side, distinguish the brainstorming session explicitly from a negotiating session where people set official views and speak on the record. People are so accustomed to meeting for the purpose of reaching agreement that any other purpose needs to be clearly stated. For the next slide, will be explained by my friend Arianna.
Great. Thank you, Nate. Now we know that the brainstorming purpose in negotiation is to broaden the options and add value to the negotiation. I'm Nadia Arianna. I'd like to talk about how we can make that a reality. The first thing we need to do is to ensure that there is no one right option. There are two ways to conditions to make this a reality. The first one is diversity. According to research done by MIT, it shows that a diverse workforce actually leads to increase of productivity. This theory can also be applied to negotiation, where diverse discussion allows both parties to be flexible and in their critical thinking and analysis. The second thing that we need to ensure to have is inclusivity. So we know that brainstorming's purpose isn't to make better options. The purpose is to make everyone happy. So according to research done by BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, they know that an inclusive workforce actually increases happiness of the employees, which then leads to an increase of productivity because 1.5 employees are more likely, because employees are 1.5 more likely to give their best in the work. If we connect that to negotiation, we know that inclusivity also leads to happiness from each party, which then can ensure a lasting relationship even after the agreement is done. So with the circular chart, we can break down the steps we need to diversify our options. First things first is that we need to identify the problems that we want to solve. The second is analysis. In this step, each party needs to think and question the reasoning or the situation behind the problem. The third is approach. How can we solve it? What's the basis of certain strategy? What's the past history with that problem, with that solution, with that strategy? Why that option? The fourth step is action. How they can solve the problem? What's the outcome? When is it due? What are the steps? And who is responsible for the solution that they want to implement? If the previous circular chart doesn't seem applicable with the solutions that each party wants to have, they can also try another method. The first step they can try is by asking an expert. So experts are known to have a vast knowledge and experiences under their belt. Because of this, they have the ability to pick the right variables and discard the wrong variables in deciding for a solution. But we need to know that experts are not immune to biases, which means that they can also take the wrong option. Therefore, their skills is only applicable to the second and the third step, where educational and theoretical background is most needed. The second method that we can take is dynamic of strength. We can try to make a weaker option available to ensure that we can still reach an agreement, even though it's second order agreement. So a second order agreement is a situation where one or the other party needs to take out a certain condition of the agreement to fit the other party's needs. The third method that we can take is changing the scope of our options. For example, we want to make a talk show about healthcare in crisis, and we are looking for sponsorship. However, right now we don't have any prominent speakers lining up. Of course, not a lot of sponsors will be willing to join our show. However, if we change the narrative, what if we have a prominent speaker coming in from the Ministry of Health? Of course, more sponsors will be more willing to lend the money to us or like pay for our event. That's what it means to be changing the scope of an opinion or of an option that we have. With that way, we can shift the other party's perspective on our option and can persuade them to reach an agreement with us. Next slide will be presented by my friend Maalique Pasha.
So next up is look for mutual gain. And there are three methods that can help you accomplish that. And basically, it tells you to go into a negotiation with the mindset of the less for you, the more for me. So don't go into a negotiation with them with thinking that only one can win and one has to lose, basically. And instead, develop a mutually advantageous relationship that can help you both in the future by like having the other cover you in the areas that you're lacking, and vice versa. The first method is to identify shared interests, and it is pretty obvious to everyone that for multiple parties to work together, they would have to have same goals or the same interests in mind. But what is not so obvious is that there are some interests that are not instantly identifiable. So you actually have to investigate further and make sure not to ruin any relationship between parties by making conflicts instantly. And the second one is to dovetail differing interests. And basically there is a common belief that differences between parties might create a problem or create conflict. But what they don't realize is that these differences can also lead to a solution. And that there's also a saying that says agreement is often based on disagreement. So an example of this would be, imagine a scenario between a buyer and a seller. The seller wants to sell his stocks because he believes the prices are going to go down, whereas the buyer wants to buy it because he believes the prices are going to go up. So this disagreement and beliefs between them actually help lay the groundwork in accomplishing their deal. And these are the types of differences that best lends themselves to dovetailing. First one is the different beliefs. Second is different values placed on time. Third is different forecasts. And the fourth is differences in aversion to risk. The third method is to ask for their preference. And basically, to easily describe this, imagine there are two parties, party A and party B. Party A would have to come up with, for example, three choices that they would then present to party B. And out of these three choices, party B would have to choose one, which one they would prefer the most. And from that choice, for example, they choose option one. And from that option one, party A would have to create several variants of that option and keep on repeating the process until they find the most suitable option, basically. And in a negotiation, the best case scenario is for the opposing party to make a decision that is satisfactory for you. And to do that, you should do whatever it takes to make that decision easy for them. And you can these guidelines can help you do that. And the first one is whose shoes, which basically you have to consider the opposing party's representative and put yourself in their position. Second one is what decision, and that is when you generate options that will change their choice that might lead to them deciding in a more satisfactory towards you. Basically, you give them answers, not problems. The third one is making threats is not enough. And instead of just threatening them on what might happen if they don't decide as we like, make them aware of the consequences, and actually convince them that the rewards are worth it, or like the rewards are like higher. Yeah, thank you.